Well folks, we got another unique project on our hands, and this time it's a 1942 Toro Parkway mower, and nearest I can figure it's a 42. I had Colin run the engine numbers on this Briggs & Stratton, and that's what he came up with for a year, so I'm assuming that's about the year of the unit. I'm having a really hard time finding info on these online. There's really nothing out there. And I did find a couple of old Toro seed magazines from the 30s and 40s that depict the Parkway mowers, just not this model unfortunately, but one similar to it. So I was thinking about writing or emailing Toro and seeing if they have anything in their archives or any old manuals or anything like that. But anyways, I picked this up in an estate. I believe it's about a 42 or 44 inch sickle bar on the front of it. Has the wooden actuator lever on the side, which is pretty darn cool. It's still all in good condition, solid wood. The engine on it is a Briggs & Stratton model AR6. So it's a Model A with a 6-to-1 reduction on the back of it, as you can see. Chain driven and then belt driven to the wheels. Somebody did put a different muffler on it at some point. And I thought these blue tanks on here weren't original to it, but when I looked up the pictures that I did find in those catalogs, these are original to Toro. They have a little toolbox in the front right here, which is kind of neato. And then of course a large long-range fuel tank for it. And on the back here we have our levers for the ground drive and then one lever for the sickle bar. I do have to do some brazing work because one of these levers had broke previously at one point before I had found it. And of course the tires have to get toned too. And these are 512 tires. I do have a stack of old gear reduction wheel tires that I changed out from customers' machines on Gravely's that are 4x12. So I think those will fit okay on these rims. If not, I'll have to dig around and see what I can find for tires. But anyways, what we're gonna do, very similar to the Panzer revamp videos, is I'm gonna pull this engine out of here and bring it down to the garage. We're gonna get this engine all squared away first, running up to par, and then we can take the carcass down and get that ready in preparation to put the engine back in. So looking this engine over, there's only a couple of things that I found that are kind of iffy on it, but everything else seems to be pretty good. And even the iffy stuff really isn't that bad. So rolling this thing over, we do have just a little bit of compression. Most likely it'll be enough to run once we get the thing to whip over. So I'll debate whether I'm going to pull the head off of here. If I have head gaskets in stock, I'll pull the head. If not, we'll take a chance and just leave it as is. Most likely I am going to pull the oil pan on this though. I did check the oil, and it's the waxy smelling stuff like the Panzer had in it. As you can see, it does look pretty clean, but it's very runny, gooey stuff. And if there is any sludge at the bottom of this, being as old as it is, most likely no one's ever been into it. So we're better off just pulling it off and cleaning it out. Gas tank is clean inside with the exception of just dry powdery gas. So we'll get that all blown out and cleaned out when the time comes, along with the fuel bowl in the fuel system. Luckily enough, it's not shellacked up or anything, so thankful for that. And the drive pulley on the back of the reduction box here does have some play in it, as you can see, and it is loose, which I actually rather have that loose and be able to clean everything out and sock it back down than have it be really tight on there and have to heat the thing off. So we'll address that when the time comes as well. I'm also going to get this exhaust cut off of here so I can work on it until I can get this nipple heated out of the head, and then we can put a new exhaust system on it that's proper for the machine. Carburetor, just a basic 4-bolt updraft flow jet carburetor for the Briggs, and that's going to be a piece of cake to rebuild. So anyways folks, let's get to it. Now that we're up here on the bench, I have to go inside and round up all the gaskets that we're going to need for this. So, in the time being, while I'm rummaging around in the cellar, I might as well let this oil drain out of here. Oh yeah, it's pretty heavy stuff, as you guys can see. That's like motor honey, pretty much, is what's in this thing. Very, very thick motor oil. So that's going to take a little bit to drain, and let's see if I can go dig up some gaskets. So a head gasket and a carburetor gasket was all that I had in stock for NOS stuff. I am going to have to cut a new base gasket for this because I don't have any that fit the Model A's. And I'm also going to have to cut a carburetor mounting gasket where the flange is right here as well, because I don't have any of those either. And now we can begin disassembly. So I'm going to start with getting this front fan shroud off of here. Not too bad, folks. Pretty clean behind the shroud. Got a little bit of stuff in the bottom here, but nothing's rotted through. Just a little bit of crap that we have to clean out. Flywheel and everything else look pretty good too. No broken fins, no cracks or nothing like that. Someone's been into here before because there's never seals on that shaft, folks. So at one point, as you can see, Briggs quality control balanced okay. And then you guys won't be able to see this, but on the face of the flywheel here on the back face, it's embossed with A, Model A, and 42 for 1942, which is kind of cool. So this has the horseshoe coil in it. Everything looks to be in very nice shape, very clean, which is a good thing, of course. Points are a little bit crispy, but those will clean up just fine. I'll bring you guys over so you can see that. So here's your points setup, which is not like your typical Briggs setup on the later models. It looks like it's got a piece of spring steel with the point contact on it, as you can see. Very basic setup. So we'll get those points cleaned up, gap those at 20,000s, and then we should be able to get spark out of this. As usual, when cleaning points, we're using a little bit of 400 grit sandpaper in here. Get everything shined up a little bit. So the points cleaned up very nicely. They're all shined up again. Now I'm going to get this flywheel back on here and we can check for spark. And if everything is square, we'll move on to pulling the head off of this thing. And we do have a good blue hot spark. Snapping across real nice. And the other thing with this too that I noticed when I was working on it is this thing has about a 1/16 of end shaft or a crankshaft end play on this, so it's pretty darn significant, but we're not going to worry about that as of right now. Should run just fine. Yeah, those loosened up pretty darn good. I was expecting more of a fight out of this thing. It looks pretty darn clean too. Hopefully you guys can see that. There's some carbon on it, but it's really not that heavy. So the guy that owned this, the estate that it came out of, he had passed away last year. I think it was last year. And I'm figuring about the majority of the stuff that I got out of there has been sitting for about 10 or 15 years now when he stopped using everything. So it's been sitting, I would figure, for at least that long. These are tiny little pistons in these Model A's. I didn't realize how small of a bore these things had. So this thing looks pretty darn good. It looks like it even has a new exhaust valve in it. It says Thompson on it. There's really no carbon or anything like that. So he might have replaced the exhaust valve when he was working on it. And the seat and the face actually looks pretty good. Along with the intake, there's a little bit of carbon on the top, but the seat and the face look good on that as well. So I think this is going to be a pretty straightforward cleanup, folks. I'm just going to get this to top dead center. I'm going to get everything scrubbed down and cleaned up, very much like I did with the Kohler on the Panzer. And then we'll be ready to put the head back on here. I'll get the head cleaned up as well and get all that scrubbed up. So this will be a pretty easy revamp, which is nice. Top of the engine cleaned up nicely, along with the valve seats and the valve faces. Cylinder is pretty good shape. There's no scoring or anything like that, no pits, but I did measure it and it's about 2 or 3 thou over, so it's got some pretty good wear to it. And that might explain why the really thick oil was in here, that motor honey like stuff, because I'm willing to bet that this engine is going to be a smoker, and most likely he put the really thick oil in there to try to keep it from smoking. And while I've been rolling it over like this with my hand on the pulley, I also noticed we have a little bit of up and down play. There's not much, but it's there, aside from the crankshaft end play. So this mower has definitely got some time on it, along with this engine, obviously enough. And the head, I cleaned that up in the glass bead cabinet, blasted all the carbon and everything off of there. So that's ready to go back on with the new gasket and get torqued down. So we have our new gasket on there, and the head's ready to go back on. So I wiped off the excess never sees that was on these head bolts, and I just put on a little bit of regular old oil for when these go back in. So the head bolts on this Model A are going to get torqued down to 140 inch-pounds, which I generally convert most inch-pound stuff into foot-pounds because I like this torque wrench a lot better. So that comes out to 11.6 if you divide it by 12. So most likely I'm just going to torque these all down to 12 foot-pounds. So we're going to start at the lowest setting and work our way up to that. And of course the torque pattern on these things is pretty darn simple, which is just going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's really nothing to it. Alright, that'll do. That takes care of our head. Let's see if we get any more compression than what we had before. Yeah, we get a little bit more. Now that everything is cleaned up. That'll be a runner. Alright, so now that the top end is done, I'm going to take the carburetor off the side, get that pulled off, and then we can get the oil pan taken off. Look inside of there. Looks pretty good down inside. There's no insects or spiders living in it. Have to see what it looks like when we open it up later. Look at that, didn't even have to smack the pan. Be nice if I can keep that gasket in one piece, that way I can make another one. A lot easier to trace them than to have to trace them on the oil pan. So here's the inside of this Model A. Pretty nice and clean. Really no issues or anything. As you can see here, that's our end play on the crank. And it has the oil pump mounted on the back side, which just operates off of an eccentric lobe on the cam gear, right in the middle there. Just pushes up a leg inside of this housing. That's what pumps the oil. So it's kind of a neat little setup. Pretty cool engine. I haven't really gotten into the letter series that much. I've been through a ton of the number series, but I've just started delving into these after all the years I've been doing this. So the oil pan does look pretty good. There's really not much of anything for sludge in it. Just, I guess, some heavy goopy oil down the bottom, small layer of that, but there's no sense in having it stay in there and getting sucked up by the oil pump. So we'll get that scraped out of there and cleaned out. And I was also able to take the oil pan gasket off and salvage that, so I can trace one on some gasket paper and recut a new one. So we're just going to scrub around a little bit of paint thinner inside of this oil pan, and that'll free up the rest of that slop and clean everything out nice. So if I wasn't able to salvage this gasket, I'd be putting oil on the gasket face of the oil pan and then pressing this paper onto it, so that way I could get the pattern for the gasket. But in this case it's just much easier to trace it out like so. And because, I don't know if you guys can see it on camera, but the edges right here and here on this gasket are actually warped in like this. So I'm not going to trace those down the side, but what I am going to do, as you can see, is I traced into the corners right here so I can get it started where it goes down on each side. And then I'm going to take my straight edge and go like this and connect them. That way I end up with nice straight sides on my gasket. So the insides I usually cut out with a scissor, but whenever I have corners and stuff like this, I'll generally go through with the razor like so and cut around those, and then I'll cut the straight edges with the scissor, because I can get a lot more accuracy with the razor when it comes to detail and going around edges on an inside versus making an attempt to get the scissors in there and then splitting paper and whatnot. Oil pan's all ready to go back on. So I have this surface here all cleaned up and degreased on the engine. So that's ready for our gasket. Oil pan's all cleaned up and degreased, and as always, have the name and the date inside of it. There's a good chance that you guys will not be seeing this thing until about late spring, early summer, because I'm going to have to find stuff to cut with it to finish the video. Now we can move on to our carburetor rebuild and get this pulled apart, see how it looks on the inside. So for those of you who don't know, on these Briggs upstrap carburetors of this style, you have to pull out the main jet that goes up through the body like so in order to split these apart. You can do it without removing the jet, but it's not very easy to do, and sometimes you can end up bending it on the way out. Floats nice and clean. It's actually set level too. And the bottom half of the body looks pretty darn good. There's a little bit of dried gas and maybe a little bit of corrosion down the bottom, but really not too overly bad, folks. I'm just going to give that a quick blast in the glass bead cabinet, and that'll be ready to go back together with new gaskets. So just a quick note, these updraft carburetors, especially the 4-bolt ones, the 3-bolt ones I never really had an issue with, but the 4-bolt ones, both the small models here and the larger ones that are found on the 12 horse and up Briggs, these bodies, the top ones, they like to warp and they won't meet up, or they won't match up, I guess. So the halves will have a warp to them, and I don't know how well you guys will be able to see that. It doesn't look like you'll be able to. Anyways, it's touching on either side right here, and then there's a gap in the middle. So what they have in the Briggs manuals and even some of the service bulletins was when you did these carburetors, if there was a warp in the body here, you discard the top half, you buy a new one, and you put it onto the bowl. Well, unfortunately, you can't get the top halves new anymore, and I refuse to buy cheap junk overseas carburetors. So what I've been doing with these, and I've had pretty good luck doing this, but you have to be very careful when you do this, is I end up taking a hammer and I bend all the corners back down again. That way this sits flush on the gasket surface and you can bolt them back together and they don't leak. But this is also just cast aluminum, so it will break. So I go very slow doing this, and I, little by little, work my way back up with the corners and get everything bent back so that way it sits flush, if not mostly flush. So I'll take care of this, then I'll put it through the glass bead cabinet and clean everything up. As I'm reassembling here, I'm about to put the float in here with the gasket, and I dropped it on the table, and hopefully you guys can actually hear this. You can hear the liquid inside of it, providing the mic picks that up. So there must have been a pinhole in here at one point and some gas got into it, and of course there's no signs of it on the outside where it's leaking out, but it's in there, so that would end up being a hung float that would sink down and would end up letting all the fuel out into the carburetor. So I'm gonna have to go find a float for this, and then I can continue with reassembly. Carburetor is all rebuilt and set to go back on, and I went ahead and cut myself a new carburetor flange gasket, so that's all set as well. And of course the fan shrouder is ready to go back on now too. So I cleaned out what little dirt was in the bottom of it, and I just wiped the bottom down with an oily rag in case, most likely I'll tarp the machine when it's all said and done, but in case it sits outside for a little while and gets any water in there, and if for some reason it doesn't run out. Of course, that cast iron shroud is pretty darn thick, so it's going to take a lot to rot through anyhow. Alright, so before we move on to the rest of the fuel system, getting the tank and the delivery system all squared away, I am going to put some oil in the sump before I forget. And I'm just going to run 10W30 in this for the time being and see how it runs. If it really smokes badly, I'll try some 1540 in it and give that a shot, because it's only going to get run during the summertime anyhow. Gas tank on here also has to get cleaned out. So this thing's pretty decent inside, with the exception of some dry powdery gas, which you might be able to see down there with the flashlight here. It's almost like a white film that's on the inside of the tank. So the majority of the time I can blow that out with compressed air, and then I can run the tank inside the glass bead blaster and just put the nozzle in here from the gun and just blast everything out. And they clean up pretty well, actually. And of course I'll check it for pinholes, because there is a little bit of rust down the bottom corners to make sure nothing's going to leak. And then I'm going to rebuild the glass fuel bowl right here, because I can repack these and I do have the gaskets for them rather than putting a new one on there. I'll get that rebuilt, glass bead blasted and everything, and then our fuel tank will be ready to go back on. Model A is all back together. As you guys could see, I ended up using the big sandblaster to clean out this tank on the inside. Somebody at one point had tried to seal this, and if this was the bottom of the tank, they probably went that far up on either side, down inside with the sealer. It didn't go all the way up and around. And unfortunately it started to blister off and peel. So I peeled off as much of it as I could with screwdrivers and wire, and the rest of it I just sandblasted, because that blaster has Black Beauty coal slag in it, which cuts through pretty much anything that you put it on. And now we're right back down to the fresh metal finish on the inside of this tank. There's a little bit of sealer left, but I'm really not that worried about it. It's good and stuck on there. Got everything off that was peeling. And luckily enough, there's no pinholes on this either. So we have a nice good gas tank to work with. I also ran the fuel shutoff bowl, the glass bowl here, through the glass bead cabinet. That cleaned up very nicely. And I cut a new packing for the shutoff T right here, so that thing will work properly once we get fuel into it. And as for the exhaust system, I finished cutting out that pipe that we had cut off at the beginning of the video in here, and I took off the exhaust that was on the end of that pipe and threaded it in. And this is going to have to get moved around a little bit once it goes back into the machine, because I believe this is in the way of some stuff in the front. Fuel line's all on there. That's the brass fuel line, but I think somebody had made that. And there's another thing too that I noticed about this, is because I had mentioned that this pulley was really loose on the back side of it at the beginning. So I pulled that off, and this keyway right here, where it's cut into the shaft, is fairly nice. It's a good true keyway. This shaft does have some play in it. But if I turn this to the other side, as you guys can see, somebody had filled up an old keyway with braze. So if I had to reckon a guess, this pulley was loose at one point in its life, and it ended up wearing out. So somebody had taken the shaft out, filled it up with braze, and then took a broach and cut another keyway on the other side of this to keep using it. Because even this shaft, with the play that it has and the crank play, this Model A has definitely done its time and has been pretty well paid for. But we're not going to worry about cleaning up this pulley right yet. That is going to come in part 2 when we get the machine down here and get that ready to drop the engine in. So we're going to get this out on the welding bench, clamp it down, get some fuel into it, and see if we can get this old Briggs to fire up. Well, despite the wear that this Model A Briggs has, everything runs very nicely. There's just a little bit of faint smoke after it's been running for a while, but aside from that, everything's nice and quiet. There's no knocks or anything like that. It starts easily and it runs nice and smooth. So I think we have a good solid engine on our hands. So this is going to be it for part 1. In part 2, we're going to be bringing the Mower chassis down here, getting that all gone through and everything in preparation to put this engine back into it, and then we can take it out and do a little bit of mowing with it. So anyways, folks, until the next one, there you have it.